The battlefield was silent. Smoke curled from the twisted wreckage of alien war machines, their metal husks still glowing from the heat of destruction. In the center of it all stood Dane Mercer, breathing heavily, his combat suit torn and stained with the blood of those who had fallen. He hadn't meant to challenge the alien leader directly. It just happened. One moment, he was fighting for survival, the next, he had driven his blade through the chest of Overlord Vesther, the tyrant who had led the invasion of Earth. The alien had collapsed, its 4 burning eyes dimming as it gasped its last breath. And then, nothing. No more attacks. No more war cries. The enemy forces had simply stopped. Dane wiped sweat from his brow, trying to process what had just happened. But before he could even take a step forward, a new sound reached his ears. Cheering. Not from humans. From the aliens. A towering warrior in black armor approached, flanked by 2 others. They bowed deeply. "You have done what no warrior in the Xyrath Empire has ever accomplished," the leader said, voice deep and solemn. "By ancient law, you are now bound to the title of High Warlord." Dane blinked. "What?" The alien continued, unbothered by his confusion. "As High Warlord, you inherit all that belonged to Vesther. His wealth. His power. His standing." Dane swallowed. That didn't sound so bad. Maybe he could use this to broker peace between their people. But then the alien added one last thing. "And of course his wives." Dane choked on his own breath. "Excuse me?" The warrior's expression didn't change. "His 3 wives. By law, they are yours now." Dane had faced death. He had fought monsters. He had even taken down the most powerful enemy Earth had ever seen. But this? This was the moment he truly panicked. Dane Mercer stared at the towering alien warrior, trying to process what he had just heard. He must have misheard. Maybe his translator was glitching. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said slowly. "I'm just a soldier. I didn't come here to—" "The law is clear," the warrior interrupted. "The one who slays the warlord becomes the warlord. The warlord's bondmates are now yours. To reject them is to bring great dishonor, not just upon yourself, but upon their entire lineage." Dane rubbed a hand over his face. He had fought in enough wars to know that different species had different customs, but this? He had barely survived the fight, and now they were throwing marriage at him? "Who are they?" he asked warily. The warrior turned and gestured. A moment later, 3 figures stepped forward. Dane's breath hitched. The first was tall and graceful, her deep violet skin gleaming in the dim battlefield light. Her silver hair was braided in intricate loops, her golden eyes sharp and assessing. She wore ceremonial armor, and her posture screamed nobility. She looked at Dane as if sizing him up, judging whether he was worthy. The second was completely different. Petite, with emerald green skin that shimmered like polished stone. She had large, dark eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of mischief. She wore a flowing robe that draped around her, the fabric catching the air with every movement. She seemed younger, less rigid than the first, but there was intelligence in her gaze. The third, she was the one that caught him off guard the most. She had dark blue skin, almost black, with glowing bioluminescent markings that pulsed faintly along her arms and neck. Her hair was short and spiky, her expression unreadable. She stood with her arms crossed, looking at him like she was ready to punch him in the face. The first one stepped forward, standing tall. "I am Salen, first wife of the warlord," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "I do not yet know if you are worthy, but the law is the law. You are my husband now." The second one tilted her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "I am Vyra. You are strange for a conqueror." "I like that." The third scoffed. "I am Rilia," she said bluntly. "I don't like you. But I will not dishonor my family." Dane took a slow breath, his heart pounding. He had expected death today. Instead, he had ended a war, and gained 3 wives he knew nothing about. He was in deep trouble. Dane paced inside the massive throne chamber of Vesther's former warship, still trying to process what had happened. Just hours ago, he had been fighting for humanity's survival. Now, he was standing in an alien palace, being told that he had somehow gained a title and 3 wives. This is insane, he muttered to himself. I'm a soldier, not some space emperor. The alien warrior from before, who had introduced himself as General Rozek, remained expressionless. It is law, he said simply. Dane exhaled sharply. And if I refuse? Rozek tilted his head. You cannot. That's not an answer. The general finally sighed. If you refuse, it would be seen as an insult. The Empire would fall into chaos. Rival warlords would battle for control, and the peace you fought for would be shattered. Dane's shoulders slumped. So this wasn't just about him. If he rejected this absurd marriage law, the war might start again. Fine, he grumbled. Let's just get this over with. Rozek clapped his hands, and the great doors of the chamber swung open. 3 figures stepped inside. Dane held his breath. The first was tall and elegant, with shimmering violet skin and deep silver eyes. Her long, braided hair was dark as night, cascading down her back like liquid silk. She wore a flowing white robe adorned with golden embroidery. There was something regal about the way she carried herself, her gaze steady and assessing. I am Zalera, she said smoothly, her voice like a song. I was Vesther's first wife. His queen? Dane swallowed hard. Queen? That meant she was probably the most important one. Great. No pressure. The second woman stepped forward. She was shorter than Zalera, but her presence was just as strong. Her jade-green skin had a faint, glowing pattern across her arms, pulsing in a rhythmic pattern. Her golden eyes were sharp, filled with curiosity as she studied him. Unlike Zalera's regal robes, she wore a sleek, armored suit, clearly a warrior. I am Sifra, she said with a smirk. Second wife. General of the war fleet? Dane felt like he'd been hit in the gut. A queen and a general? What kind of man had Vesther been? And more importantly, how was he supposed to live up to that? Then the third woman stepped forward, and Dane's brain short-circuited. She was different. Unlike the other 2, who carried themselves with confidence and authority, this one seemed hesitant, almost shy. She had soft lavender skin, and her golden hair curled in waves around her shoulders. She wore a flowing blue dress, and her large, bright eyes seemed to glow faintly as they flickered between Dane and the floor. I am Elvia, she said quietly. Third wife. Scholar. A queen, a warrior, and a scholar. Dane suddenly had the horrible realization that these weren't just random alien women. These were 3 of the most powerful and influential figures in the Empire. And now, apparently, they were his. He ran a hand through his hair. Nice to meet you? Zalera arched a perfect eyebrow. You are not what I expected. Sifra snorted. He's human. What did you expect? Elvia peeked up at him, then quickly looked away. Dane sighed. Look, I don't know how this usually works, but I wasn't exactly planning on getting married today. So, how do we do this? Zalera studied him for a long moment before speaking. Vesther won us through conquest. He took what he desired, and we had no choice but to follow. Her silver eyes locked onto his. But you are different. Dane nodded. Yeah. I don't do the whole taking people as property thing. A strange silence filled the room. Then, to his surprise, Sifra grinned. Good answer. Elvia let out a tiny breath, her shoulders relaxing just a little. Zalera, however, remained unreadable. We shall see. Dane had a feeling his problems were only just beginning. Dane sat in what had once been Overlord Vesther's war chamber. Now it was apparently his. The walls were lined with alien banners, depicting symbols he didn't understand. A massive circular table stood at the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs made of dark metal. It was all too much. Zalera, Sifra, and Elvia sat across from him, watching. Judging. So, Dane said, clearing his throat, What now? Zalera folded her hands elegantly. Now you must fulfill your role as High Warlord. Dane leaned back. And what does that mean, exactly? Sifra smirked. It means you rule the Xyrath Empire. Dane groaned. Of course it does. Elvia shifted slightly in her chair, hesitant. If you wish, we could guide you. He glanced at her, surprised by the softness in her tone. Unlike Zalera and Sifra, who radiated strength and confidence, Elvia seemed nervous. He appreciated her attempt to help, though. Zalera exhaled, her silver eyes sharp. We will guide you, she corrected. For the sake of stability. Dane nodded. Right. Stability. But his mind was spinning. He wasn't a ruler. He was a soldier. A survivor. And now, he was supposed to lead an alien empire and figure out how to deal with 3 wives he hadn't asked for? Okay, he said finally. Let's start with something simple. What do you want? The question seemed to catch them off guard. Sifra was the first to recover. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. That's a dangerous question, human. Dane shrugged. I like dangerous questions. Zalera studied him for a long moment before answering. I want a leader worthy of this empire. Dane met her gaze. And that means? She tilted her head. You must prove yourself. Sifra grinned. I like a man who has to earn his place. Elvia fidgeted. I just want peace. Dane sighed. He could work with that. All right, he said, rubbing his temples. Then let's make a deal. Zalera arched an eyebrow. A deal? Dane nodded. I'll do my best to lead. I'll try to be the warlord you need. But in return, I want you to promise me something. Sifra smirked. Depends on the deal. He leaned forward. Promise me that none of you are here against your will. I don't care what your laws say. If you don't want to be with me, I won't force you. Silence. Elvia's eyes widened. Sifra's smirk faltered. Zalera, for the first time, actually looked surprised. You would release us? Zalera asked, voice unreadable. Dane nodded. If that's what you want, yes. Sifra let out a low chuckle. You really are different from Vester. Elvia's expression softened. That is kind. Zalera, however, studied him like he was an unsolved puzzle. Finally, she stood. I will consider your offer, she said simply, before walking away. Sifra grinned. This just got interesting. She winked at Dane before following Zalera out. That left Elvia, who lingered for a moment. Dane gave her a small smile. You okay? She hesitated, then nodded. I think so. She glanced at the door where the others had left. You are not what I expected either. Dane chuckled. I get that a lot. Elvia bit her lip, as if debating something, then quickly turned and hurried after the others. Dane exhaled, leaning back in his chair. He had no idea what he was doing. But he had a feeling this was only the beginning. Dane hadn't slept. The weight of his new reality pressed on him like a crushing force. One moment, he was a soldier fighting to survive. The next, he was the ruler of an alien empire, with 3 wives he didn't even know. And the worst part? He was starting to like them. Not in the marriage sense, not yet, at least. But each of them had something that pulled at him. Zalera, with her commanding presence and sharp intellect. Sifra, with her fire and confidence. And Elvia, with her quiet kindness, her soft voice that seemed to calm the chaos around him. It was dangerous. He didn't want them. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The palace halls were vast, carved from dark stone and lined with banners bearing the sigil of the Xyrath Empire. Dane wandered aimlessly, his mind still tangled in the mess of politics, war, and unexpected marriage. He didn't realize he had reached the gardens until he saw her. Elvia. She was sitting on a stone bench, bathed in the soft glow of the twin moons above. Her golden hair shimmered under the light, and her lavender skin looked almost ethereal in the night air. A book rested on her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was staring up at the sky, lost in thought. Dane hesitated, then stepped forward. You all right? Elvia jumped slightly, turning to him. Oh. I did not hear you. Dane smiled. Didn't mean to sneak up on you. She studied him for a moment before gesturing to the bench. Would you like to sit? He hesitated, then nodded. For a while, neither of them spoke. The air was cool, the scent of alien flowers drifting around them. It was peaceful. Finally, Elvia broke the silence. You are different from him. Dane turned to her. Vesther? She nodded. He was cold. Ruthless. To him, marriage was nothing but an alliance. She looked down at her hands. I was given to him for my knowledge. My mind. Nothing more. Dane frowned. That's awful. Elvia gave him a small, sad smile. It is the way of our people. Dane exhaled. I don't care about the way of your people. That's not how I do things. She looked up at him then, eyes searching his face as if trying to find the truth in his words. You mean that, don't you? Dane nodded. Yeah. I do. A strange silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Elvia reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. I do not know what will happen now, she whispered. But I think I am glad it is you. Dane swallowed hard. Because the moment her hand touched his, he realized something terrifying. He wanted to be hers too. The next morning, Dane found himself in the training grounds. Sifra was waiting. She stood with her arms crossed, her green skin glowing under the morning sun. Her golden eyes were sharp, focused. She wore a sleeveless combat suit, her toned arms marked with faint scars. Dane barely had time to react before a training blade was thrown at him. Fight me, she said simply. Dane caught the blade instinctively. A what? Sifra grinned. You heard me, human. If you're going to be warlord, I need to know if you're worth following. Dane sighed. Can't we just have breakfast first? Sifra lunged. Dane barely dodged in time. Her strikes were fast, too fast. She fought like a predator, her movements sharp and precise. Dane blocked her next attack, but the force of it sent a shock up his arm. She was strong. But Dane wasn't weak. He countered, shifting his stance, using his speed to dodge her relentless assault. For a while they were locked in a deadly rhythm. Attack, dodge, counter, repeat. Then, in a moment of reckless instinct, Dane ducked low and swept her legs out from under her. Sifra hit the ground. Silence. Then, laughter. Sifra lay on her back, laughing, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Well damn, she said between chuckles. Maybe you are worth something. Dane extended a hand. She took it, her grip firm and warm. When she stood, she didn't let go. Her golden eyes locked onto his, unreadable. You're different, she murmured. And I think I like it. Dane swallowed. This was dangerous. But when she smirked, brushing a finger against his jaw before walking away, he knew one thing for certain. He was in trouble. Dane was losing control. Not of the Empire. No, that part was slowly stabilizing. He was earning the respect of the Xyrath people, proving he wasn't just a fluke who killed their former leader. Even Zalera had stopped looking at him like an untested experiment. No, the problem wasn't ruling. The problem was them. Elvia, who looked at him with soft wonder, like he was something fragile and precious. Sifra, who challenged him, who made his blood rush with every smirk and touch. And Zalera, who still kept her distance, but when she watched him, there was something unreadable in her silver eyes. Dane had walked into this thinking he could keep things simple. Be their ruler, their protector. Nothing more. But fate had other plans. That evening, Zalera came to him. She arrived at his chamber unannounced, her long violet robes flowing behind her. Dane, still dressed in his combat gear, turned in surprise. Didn't expect a visit, he admitted. Zalera studied him in the dim candlelight. I was uncertain before, she said. But now I have decided. Dane arched an eyebrow. Decided what? She stepped closer. You are not like Vesther. You do not rule through fear. You lead in a way our people have never seen. Her silver eyes locked onto his. And that intrigues me. Dane exhaled. Intrigues, huh? She reached out, brushing her fingers against his wrist. It was a feather-light touch, but it sent a jolt through him. "I do not give myself freely," she murmured. "But I am willing to see where this path leads." Dane swallowed hard. Zalera had never been one for warmth. But this was something new. Something dangerous. "Then I guess we'll figure it out together," he said. Zalera gave the smallest of smiles. And for the first time, Dane felt the weight on his shoulders lessen. The next morning, he found Elvia waiting for him. She stood by the palace gardens, hands clasped in front of her. When she saw him, her cheeks darkened to a soft violet hue. I wanted to thank you," she said shyly. Dane blinked. "For what?" "For letting me choose," she said. "For not forcing this." Dane rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, that's just basic decency." Elvia smiled. "It is rare in our world." Before he could respond, she reached up and touched his chest. Just for a moment. It was nothing. A brief, barely there brush of warmth. But something in Dane cracked. Because it was real. No politics. No duty. Just her. And he wanted more. That evening, Sifra found him in the training grounds. "Fight me again," she demanded, tossing him a blade. Dane sighed. "You just like an excuse to hit me, don't you?" She grinned. "Maybe." They clashed, moving in a deadly dance of strikes and dodges. But this time, something was different. This time, when Dane pinned her against the wall, holding her wrists above her head, she didn't break free. She just smirked. "Not bad, human," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Dane's heart pounded. He had no idea what he was doing. But when Sifra leaned in just slightly, just enough to test him, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't fighting this anymore. Dane had fought wars. He had stood against overwhelming odds, faced death more times than he could count. And yet, standing before the three women who were now bound to him by law, he felt more unsteady than ever. It had been days since Zalera had touched his wrist and told him she was willing to see where their path led. Since Elvia had thanked him with soft words and even softer hands. Since Sifra had let herself be caught in a moment neither of them had expected. And now, here they were. All of them waiting for his decision. Zalera stood tall, regal as ever, her silver eyes steady. Sifra leaned against the railing, arms crossed, watching him with a knowing smirk. Elvia looked uncertain, her fingers clasped together, her gaze flickering between them all. Dane took a deep breath. "I don't want to force any of you into this," he said. "I never did." Zalera tilted her head. "You have said this before?" Dane nodded. "Because it's true." He met her gaze. "But I also won't lie to you. I want you. All of you." Elvia's breath hitched. Sifra's smirk widened. Zalera's eyes flashed with something unreadable. Dane ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what kind of warlord I'll be. Hell, I don't even know if I'll be a good one. But I do know one thing." He stepped forward, looking at each of them. "I don't want a marriage that's just about duty. I want a partnership. I want something real." A long silence stretched between them. Then, Zalera stepped closer, her hands cool as they cupped his face. "You are a strange man, Dane Mercer." Her lips curved just slightly. "And I find that I like it." Elvia hesitated, then nodded. "Me too." Sifra chuckled, stepping up to his other side. "Guess I'm in, then." Dane exhaled, his heart pounding as three pairs of eyes watched him, really watched him. For the first time since this madness started, he wasn't afraid. Because this wasn't about war. It wasn't about laws or traditions. It was about them. And this was just the beginning. The end.